So at this time, we're going to switch over to Brian. So Brian, why don't you go ahead and take it away? And thank you.
All right, thank you, Doug. Again, as Doug mentioned, I'm Brian Fuchs. I'm with the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and I'll be going through the update for everyone today. So just some general information, Doug mentioned some of this as well. Many people are coming together, many different groups to get this webinar series going each month. Next month, we will be on October 21st. Laura Edwards and Brad Rippey will be teaming up to provide this update. You can find information for future webinars. I think someone needs to mute if they haven't. Future webinars are listed at this link, and also you can find past webinars. They are recorded and shared at 2 different locations. So the agenda for today, I'm going to be talking about some of the current and recent past conditions. We'll get into some of the regional impacts, general impacts, hydrological, agriculture as well, get into the outlooks, and at the very end, we will be taking questions either in the chat to start with, or Doug may actually pull people out and have them just speak as well. So current conditions, and you know, this photo here kind of sets the tone of what we've been seeing in the Dakotas, just a rangeland fire in early August, and we've seen some of that in the region, but not as much as of the most recent couple weeks. So doing the climatology for August here, we have temperature rankings on the left, and we have precipitation rankings on the right. Starting with temperatures, you can see that much of the region was pretty much above average for temperatures.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We're getting a couple notes that you're hard to hear, sort of like we suspected. So is there a way to just yell at us, please? And or put the mic, just bring it up to your mouth, I guess, if you can. Pretend you're mic'd up or something. Yeah, a couple of people are saying hard to hear him, and yeah, some people are saying you sound great. So just go ahead, Brian. Sorry I interrupted you. Are you there? Hope we didn't lose him. Brian, are you there? Hello? Your mic is on. Brian, can you hear us? Okay, he's going to call in on a different number, so I'm sorry about that. Stand by. I could probably talk to.
Do you have any questions, Doug?
No questions, just lots of I can hear him. I could go over these maps real quick. These are the August maps and rankings for obviously the United States, and on the left is temperature, on the right is precipitation. The higher the value on the left, the closer. Brian, just start talking when you call in. The higher the number on the left, the closer to the record high, which for that particular state would be. So in this case, both Vermont and New Hampshire in the deep red, both recorded their record high temperatures for August. Now, if you look to the Midwest and the Great Plains, you'll see that our values were certainly on the warm side, but not record-setting for the month of August. Precipitation-wise, sort of a mixed bag, I would say, where some places that are still in major drought, severe drought, especially in Montana, the Dakotas and such, got a little wetter. Again, nothing crazy wet, and a little dry down in Kansas and Missouri. In sort of the Midwest is that mixed bag as well as you go to the east, with Kentucky being I guess the shining star of the wetness. And anyway, it was 115 rank out of.
Hey, Doug, I'm back on. Or can you hear me, Doug?
Sure can. You can just go to the next slide. Much better. Much better.
Yeah, it's the platform, Doug. It's not the speaker. It's not the mic. It's the platform. So,
okay. Go
anyway,
ahead,
we'll continue.
Yep.
So the summer climatology, looking at the region. As we look at temperatures on the left and precipitation on the right, we can see that through much of the region, everyone was either above average or much above average. Unlike the western states where we saw several record warmest summer temperature readings that was trying to make its way eastward, but never quite did. But still, looking at Montana, second warmest ever, and even in some of those upper Midwest areas as well. For precipitation, we do see that dryness that was being shown in Minnesota and up in the northern plains, as well as into Montana. Top 10 in both Montana and not Wisconsin, but Minnesota for top 10 driest summers ever, going back to 1895. And then the further east you go in the region, we had conditions that were a little bit wetter than normal. And so that's reflected in those rankings as well. So if you really had to draw a line through the region, you can really see that if you were west of that line, pretty much from Iowa to Kansas, you were on the dry side of things in this summer. And if you're on the east side of that line, you're pretty much were near normal to above normal for the summer months. With that being said, we do know that some of these rain events were not all equal, meaning that some of them were wetter than sudden downpours, I guess, for lack of a better term, that were quite spotty. And we do have a lot of reports coming in that one county may have been quite wet and a couple of counties over did not see that. And, some of the numbers were crunched and shared earlier in the last couple of weeks that for temperatures, we were pretty darn close to 1936, give or take a tenth of a degree here or there, as far as being the record warmest summer for the United States. The only difference, and this was discussed as well, was in 1936, we saw the extreme heat. A lot of those temperatures were well into the hundreds for extended periods of time. And compared to this summer, where we made that average temperature become a record, was those overnight lows. We just were not seeing the overnight temperatures get down to where they should have been, and that's where we set this record. So just looking over the last 30 days or so, what we are seeing is temperatures have been quite a bit above normal through much of the region. We're seeing that areas of lower Michigan, western Kansas, eastern Colorado definitely were 3 to 4 to even 5 degrees above normal just over the last 30 days. And what really makes this kind of unique is, we're already halfway through September and we're still seeing these temperatures near record-setting temperatures, even in some places that have been holding on. And to me, this is really shortening what our autumn season is going to look like. How does that reflect in the regional soil moisture? And this is from the NLDAS, and this is for the total column of soil. And this is looking at those soil moisture anomalies and break them down into percentiles. And so what I did is I highlighted 4 areas that we're seeing quite dry soils. And again, this is the total column. So some of those most recent rains haven't percolated down to the deepest layers of the soil. But what we are seeing is, again, North Dakota continues to stay dry. The summer dryness that developed in Wisconsin and Minnesota, Illinois and Iowa, that's still showing up. And then even some dryness that's developed over the last several months over parts of eastern Wyoming, eastern Colorado, western Nebraska, northwest Kansas. Those are kind of showing up. And, one thing that we really want to point out this time of year is we do pay attention to these because this is telling us the areas that are most in need of that soil moisture recharge as we go into wintertime. Of course, every location would like to replenish the moisture into the soils, but these areas that are really highlighted are going to be the ones that are going to really struggle the most because they have the biggest deficits to reclaim with soil moisture before they freeze up. And the evaporative demand. So this is the EDI tool, the Evaporative Demand Drought Index. And this is really showing how much moisture is possibly being taken out of the water systems, that water balance equation for these regions. And again, the upper Midwest, northern plains are really still showing that these areas, the demand based on just how dry the atmosphere is and how the temperatures have been, that evaporative demand is still quite high even for this time of year. And as we look at the vegetation response to this dryness, I have a comparison to where we were last September on the left and this year on the right. And what we're seeing is, especially looking at some of those areas of the upper Midwest and northern plains, last year at this time, you know, we were talking about drought developing there and continuing in the region. And you look at the vegetation and what it looks like this year, and most of those areas are still showing severe to extreme drought now. So there's been quite the progression in those northern areas. And the other area that really stands out is look at that area in northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin. It's been on that dry side for quite some time, for the entire calendar year. And we're really seeing that that progression from last year to this year was quite stark, and how even in Iowa, it changed from western Iowa to more of central and eastern Iowa, and then into that Illinois and Wisconsin area. Looking at precipitation for the last 30 days, what we are seeing is the departure of normal on the left and the percent of normal on the right. Starting on the right-hand side, when you start seeing those blues and purples, that's areas that are showing, you know, 150, 200, even 300% of normal precipitation over the last 30 days, which is again talking about that soil moisture replenishment. That as we're coming pretty much to the end of the agricultural season, a lot of that moisture is going to go back into the soils and not really be used extensively, especially in those areas where temperatures have not been as warm. Looking at those departures, we can see that just over the last 30 days, there's a couple pockets in northern Iowa, northeast South Dakota, and western Minnesota that, again, they were anywhere from 4.5, 6 inches or more above normal just over the last 30 days. And that's done a lot to help ease some of the drought and dry conditions in those regions. But then you also can see that from southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, southern Iowa, northern portions of Missouri, that it's been quite dry over the last 30 days. Some of those deficits are approaching 3 inches or even more in some pockets. And again, that really starts playing into that whole discussion about what soil moisture recharge is going to look like for the rest of the fall. As we jump back a little bit further, so this takes us from mid-June to present. Again, we see departures on the left, percent of normal on the right. And again, those areas in blue and purple on the right-hand side, they really stand out as areas of Wisconsin and Michigan, Illinois, Missouri, eastern Kansas, even into portions of eastern Nebraska. And then even as you go further west into portions of Wyoming and Colorado, especially the western portions of those states, the last 90 days has been pretty favorable for those areas that you see those percent of normal values so high. But then when you start looking at those departures, and again, looking at portions of northern Illinois, where you're talking anywhere from 6 to 9 inches below normal just in the last 90 days, or even in northern portions of Minnesota, where you see some of those same deficits. There are portions of the region that definitely have been drying out, even with some short-term relief here recently over the last 90 days. And as we go back out to the calendar year, the percent of normal on the right really tells a story with as much red as we're seeing. So that red that's on there is 50 to 70% of normal for the calendar year. And you see almost all the northern locations of the region are quite entrenched in that range of 50 to 70% of normal precipitation for the calendar year. And then you start looking at those departures. Again, we'll look at that central Iowa to northern Illinois region, 12 to 15 inches below normal in some of those pockets. And when you start looking at that for just the calendar year and knowing some of that dryness even started in the fall beforehand, these deficits are quite extensive. And again, they're showing up on many indicators. We saw it in the soil moisture. We saw it in the vegetation. We'll see it in some of the other things that we bring up. But that dryness, definitely through the Dakotas, Minnesota, Iowa, northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, eastern Montana, those deficits are anywhere from 3 to 6 inches or more just for the calendar year. And that really is telling the story about some of those areas that, again, going back to some of those ranking numbers that we saw just for the summer, it's matching up quite well.
And
so some of the
hey, Brian, go back one slide, and maybe make the point, especially because you are such a drought expert. Talk about a little bit about how difficult it would be for the fall season, because we're getting into a drier time, to make up those deficits. Just, even if we have 100%, even if we have normal precip. Say something about that, would you?
Yeah, that's a great point to make, Doug, and I should have said that to begin with. But Doug, as Doug mentioned, we are going into a climatological drier time of the year as we get in further into fall and into winter. And when we see these deficits, you're not going to make up 12 inches of precipitation outside of a freak precipitation event in portions of northern Illinois. And through the Dakotas, and that making up those deficits, it just becomes less likely. And so what we're really focusing on going forward is the precipitation we do get. Where is it falling? How is it falling? A rain that happens over 2 or 3 days is very different than one that happens over 2 or 3 hours. And then also, what are the overlying conditions? Some of those areas in the Dakotas that have had this extensive drought over the entire year, some of those surfaces become a little bit more impermeable to that precipitation, and it does lead to some issues for infiltration and getting that moisture into the soils that we'd like to see. So again, it is complex, and going into a drier time of year, the likelihood of making up even a portion of these deficits really does decline. So as we transition into some of the regional impacts, one thing I wanted to make note of on this slide is we see some sorghum in Kansas on the left-hand side, and we see a lake in Minnesota on the right-hand side. And the picture of the lake in Minnesota actually came from a system that the National Drought Mitigation Center has, where anyone in the public or just anyone can send in their observations of the type of climatic impacts they're seeing both on the wet or dry side. And this was a photo that was shared from Gull Lake in Minnesota, and just showing the lake drawdown due to the drought up in that region. And I don't expect you to read everything on the slide, but that dock is 36 feet long, so it tells you how far the water has receded. And those wheels on the dock are 2 foot high. So you can really see that typically at the edge of that dock, there should be anywhere from 4 to 6 feet of water. And they probably have maybe 8 or 10 inches of water right there. So I encourage folks to use the Seymour reporting system if they want to share anything like this, and photos are always great. It helps to tell that story. So we'll transition into South Dakota. Laura Edwards shared some great information with me. Wheat planting is starting out with pretty decent moisture. They have had some late summer moisture in the state that has helped with winter wheat planting. We're seeing some stock issues developing on corn, which may impact harvest with some lodging issues. The recent moisture has brought a lot of weeds out into the region. And late August, there on the 28th, they had this hailstorm that crossed the northern and northeast part of the state. And as you can see, the photos that were shared to me from Laura, the other thing really impacted by this hailstorm was wildlife. Thousands, if not tens of thousands of pheasants were killed in this hailstorm. And you can see the damage to crops and property and everything else that took place in this part of the state. As we go to Minnesota, talking about some of the late summer moisture that's been documented just over, again, the last part of August, the 2-week precipitation map that is shown at the bottom there. Some of those areas in southern Minnesota had at least 2 inches, if not 3 inches of rain, and some of the areas actually had 6 to 8 inches of rain during that time, and that was actually went into portions of northern Iowa as well. So again, a good couple weeks of precipitation, and it did help with soil moisture. This is one soil moisture station in the state, and you can see at the beginning of September there, where there was a pretty good uptick in soil moisture at all the different levels. That's good to see as well, because that's really what we want to see this time of year. There has been some fires up in Minnesota as well. One has burned 26,000 acres over the last month, and it is 75% contained at this time, but it is still burning. As we go into some of the crops, so this is the percent of the corn crop that is in good to excellent condition right now, and that was as of September 12th, and you can see that outside of Minnesota, North and South Dakota, much of the corn crop in the region is looking pretty good. A lot of these areas are within a couple points of where they were in the past few weeks, and we see a lot of that in the good to excellent through anywhere from Ohio to Illinois, Wisconsin and Michigan, to Iowa, Nebraska, and Missouri. So the corn crop is looking fairly good for this time of year. We are progressing. We're seeing this is the amount of corn that has matured, and compared to the 5-year average is the number on the bottom. And so what we can see is a national average, about 37% of corn is matured, but we are seeing that progress quite nicely, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit more as we go forward. And even harvest has started. So these numbers are kind of low for where we are in the agricultural season, but harvest has started, especially seeing some of that corn crop being chopped for silage, and then actually some of it, the early corn that has properly dried down, or even some of the high moisture corn that gets picked early. And so that takes us to Illinois, what Trent Ford had shared. Corn and soybeans drying fast, some of the grain moistures in the mid 20% level already, which again, this is for producers something they really look at and help save on drying costs. Again, corn being chopped for silage. Some of those storms that brought the hail into portions of South Dakota, there was other storms in northern Illinois where wind damage, and these are the pictures that were submitted by Russ Higgins to Trent, and a lot of that corn was getting blowed over. What really happens is it does make it harder for harvest. You just got to take your time. You're not going to get through those fields as quickly, but for the most part, this corn should be able to be harvested. Maybe look at some lodging issues or getting that corn head down low enough to get everything. And just kind of a stat that Trent shared with me that we talked about that dryness in northern Illinois. Chicago is about 0.02 of an inch less than at the same time in 2012, which was really the last big drought year in the region that we all remember. And it's the driest that it's been since 2005. So again, this year is significant in some of these areas that just have persistently been dry going all the way back into last fall even. Soybeans, similar to corn. I'm not going to go over this too much. Again, North and South Dakota and Minnesota are kind of standing out as those areas again, which makes sense that they've been the driest. So the soybeans are not going to respond as well, just like corn. But for the most part, good to excellent soybeans through the region. Maturation is continuing as well, where we're seeing leaves dropping. And again, we're going to start seeing more of these beans get ready for harvest, same as with corn. And winter wheat being planted. We didn't get some reports from some areas, but we are seeing that winter wheat planting has progressed, and it will continue. One of the key things, especially in parts of eastern Colorado and northwest Kansas, is some of the producers are really leery about planting this wheat into these dry soils because of just how dry the last several months have been. So starting in Wyoming, from Justin Durner, most of the winter wheat's already been planted in southeast Wyoming. Spotty rains has led to some green up, some rangeland and forage conditions remain good to excellent in southeast Wyoming, which is very different than what we'd see further to the north. Hay supplies in the region, and that's not just to Wyoming, but Montana and in the Dakotas. Those hay supplies due to drought definitely are on the decrease, and that means the prices on the market are on the increase. Available feed is becoming more problematic for those livestock producers. Alfalfa is getting the third cutting, and silage being cut all the way from northeast Colorado and southeast Wyoming all the way into central Nebraska, which was similar to what we were hearing in states further to the east. And Becky out in Colorado said, coming off of a fairly wet spring, the summer was dry, especially in eastern Colorado, and it was tough on some of those spring planted crops. Winter wheat planting is taking place with decent germination, except in northeast Colorado, where it's slowing down the planting progress because of dryness. Again, these hot temperatures into September, which are something we typically don't see. A lot of records still being set with 100-degree weather into September. Western Colorado definitely benefited from a good southwest monsoon season, which helped with soil moisture, as well as some minimal surface flows returning. And at this time, that she said there hasn't really been any fire issues in Colorado to really talk about. And talking about that hay and pasture condition report that we see here from USDA and how that really plays into the hay stock availability in the region, you can see that in Montana, North and South Dakota, and Wyoming, available forage is going to be hard to find just because of how poor the pasture and rangelands conditions have been. And this is the latest report from this week. Going to the Missouri River, the red line on the chart on the right is really showing where we're at right now. You can see that the runoff and system storage is quite a bit below normal from where we should be. The reports from those that work with the Army Corps of Engineers in the Missouri River Basin that this is a top 10 low runoff year for the Missouri River Basin, and that again is being reflected in what we're seeing as far as storage levels and releases that are going into the system. Needless to say, there's adequate room in all of those reservoir systems on the Missouri to handle all the flood concerns and that going into spring that they need to worry about and manage for. So far, the releases downstream have been going according to their master plan as well. Looking at stream flows through the region, what we are seeing is, again, this is a time of year where we typically see lower stream flow values because, again, climatologically, it is a drier time of the year. So you see a lot of greens and blues on this map, but you do see in northern Minnesota, central Iowa, southwest Nebraska, even in portions of North Dakota, some of those surface flows, especially on those longer 28-day averages, are still well below normal, or even some record lows showing up in northern Minnesota. Looking at the Great Lakes, this is the current lake levels and also the forecast for the rest of 21 into early 22. That's the red crosshatched area. And you can see that lake levels are a little bit lower than what they typically should be for this time of year. And the forecast is kind of sticking with that we're not seeing any drastic changes. We do see on Lake Ontario that has the largest spread of forecasts, and it's showing more of an uptick as far as lake levels go. So we'll have to see how these play out. But really, no concerns on the Great Lakes have been relayed to share with this report that I'm giving.
Brian,
we'll get in. Yeah.
Just want to go back.
Yes, Doug.
Just want to clarify that Lakes Michigan, Huron are still well above normal, and that Superior is near normal at this time and projected to be near normal. Above the blue line is what we want to look for in terms of above average or not. So Erie's above normal, and Ontario is near normal as well. So just wanted to make sure I got that right, or we got that right. Thank you.
Yep, I did not say that correctly, so thank you for clarifying. So we have a drought update. Again, this is that same doc In Minnesota, looking at a different perspective, I like the picture with the sunset, so that's why I shared it. But you can really see how drawn down that lake is in that one particular level, and that's in north central Minnesota for those that want a geographic perspective on where this is. The new Drought Monitor Map came out today. Brad Rippey, one of the speakers for next month, was the author, and you can see that across the country, still the western U.S., the northern plains, the northern Rockies are really the epicenter of where we're seeing the drought, but we still have quite a bit of drought in northern Minnesota, in the Dakotas, Montana and Wyoming, and western Colorado. Looking at it at a national perspective, we have about 38% of the country is in drought. A year ago, this was right under 33%, so about 5% more in the last year. And we see about 30% of the country is in severe drought or worse, which is a pretty decent number. And about 73 million people are being impacted by drought in the U.S. as of the release of the map this morning. When we zoom into just the north central region, again, you can see some of those regional anomalies of where we're seeing that extreme and exceptional drought. And again, I focused on that D2 or worse number on the statistics on the right. And so a year ago, we had about 16% of the region was in severe drought or worse, or D2 or worse on the map. And that's compared to a little over 36% of the region today. And just 3 months ago, we were only at 24%. And so what we are seeing is, again, the drought has continued to expand. We're seeing it in more of the region. And it has also still intensified, and we're seeing that, if we look at the D3 to D4, about 20% of the region is in extreme to exceptional drought, with most of that in the northern and northwestern portions of the region. Looking at the last 3 weeks or so on the change map, you can see the shades of green are where the drought monitor has improved during the mid-June to mid-September timeframe. Those yellows and oranges are where the drought monitor has gotten worse. So definitely have noticed what's going on in northern Minnesota, portions of Montana, northeast Kansas, southwest Nebraska, eastern Colorado, and Wyoming. Those are areas that we've seen quite a bit of degradation over the last 13 weeks. But then again, you can see that areas in Iowa and Michigan in Wisconsin, northeast South Dakota, there's been upwards of 3-class improvement during that same time frame. And again, if you recall back to those precipitation maps that I was showing earlier, these were some of the same areas that did pick up some significant precipitation here in the last 3 to 4 weeks or so. The last thing we'll go into are the outlooks for the 7-day period, 8 to 14, monthly, seasonal, and winter, as well as the drought outlook. So rainfall over the next 7 days, it looks like almost the entire region is going to have potential to see some precipitation over the next week or so. So that's kind of good, especially in some of those areas that we are looking at needing some more recharge. And what really stands out to me is some of those northern areas picking up some of that rain. Definitely they could use it more so than anywhere else in the region, up there in the Dakotas and Minnesota and upper Midwest area. As we go in the 8 to 14 day period, which takes us almost to the end of September, we have the temperature probabilities on the left and the precipitation probabilities on the right. For those in the ag business, this forecast is almost ideal for finishing out those grain crops and getting them the start of harvest going. Unless you're a winter wheat grower, then this doesn't look too favorable, as we see much of the region having better than normal chances of above normal temperatures and better than normal chances of below normal precipitation, really sticking through the theme for much of the north central region. As we look into the monthly outlook for what October could look like, again, temperatures on the left and precipitation on the right, really looks like those above normal chances of above normal temperatures are really holding pat, especially from Colorado through Nebraska up into the Midwestern states, where that probability is about 50 to 60%. probability of seeing above normal temperatures during that time, which is pretty high. For precipitation, we're seeing equal chances to possibly some dry, below normal chances of normal precipitation, or above normal chances of below normal precipitation in portions of the central plains. But as we go further east, we start seeing equal chances to maybe above normal chances of above normal precipitation during the month of October. But again, really some transition zones in there. Those equal chances areas could swing one way or the other quite easily, to be honest, especially as we mentioned, drier time of year, 1 or 2 rain events could swing the pendulum one way or the other for any of these areas. As we look into the October through December time scale, so this is October, November, December, again, temperatures on the left, precipitation on the right. What we are continuing to see is for temperature, for a lot of the region outside of the northern tier, there's above normal chances of above normal temperatures. And for precipitation, we're seeing some of the area clear to the eastern and areas of Michigan and northern Ohio and Indiana, above normal chances for above normal precipitation, but a lot of equal chances and above normal chances of below normal precipitation through these areas. And what that means as well is, again, the fall being quite dry, even into early winter, really watching to see if this dryness is persistent. Are we talking just some small rain events or early snow events, or are we talking a complete miss of all precipitation? But then again, being a drier time of year, the deficits may not show it, but we will notice it in things like recharge and surface water flows and things like that. This is the climatological first freeze dates. And so when we start looking at those darker greens, that's the first 10 days of October. Those lighter hues of blue are really the end of September, the last 9 or 10 days of September. So what this is saying is we are coming upon a time of year where our first freeze can be happening, especially in the northern portions of the region or any of the higher elevation areas. But, you know, going back to what we are showing in October, the signal is showing above normal chances of temperatures being above normal. So what, you know, my guess would be that freeze concerns probably won't be anything that we're really worried about anytime too soon. And the signal is showing that much of this region may see later than normal, or maybe on the later half of the range of the expected first freeze. With that being said, you notice that a lot of the southern tier of the U.S. look to be warm and dry through many of the outlooks I showed, and this is definitely related to a La Niña signal. We are seeing La Niña winter happening, and there is a La Niña watch. And, you know, we have right up to 80% probability of La Niña taking place through the beginning of fall, developing and carrying on through the winter months. So second year of La Niña winter, we had that last year. What does that mean? Typically, we see those jet streams displace the polar and the Pacific, and that typically means that drier and warmer conditions take place along the southern tier of the U.S. And you do see that wet blob on the eastern portions of the Midwest, and that kind of correlates well with some of the outlooks that we'd seen as well. And just a first look at the winter outlook as well. And again, the official winter outlook will be discussed on next month's webinar. But here's, again, very La Niña looking. Warmer than normal temperatures anticipated along the southern tier of the U.S. Dryness definitely in the southwestern U.S. A lot of equal chances through our region. And then we see that above normal chances of above normal precipitation through a lot of the Midwestern states, especially on the eastern side. And again, that correlates strongly with a La Niña type of a winter. Seasonal drought outlook, 2 more slides to go. We are anticipating some drought development likely in much of the plains that are currently drought free. And a lot of those drought areas that we see are going to persist, with maybe some improvement or removal in portions of northern Wisconsin and Minnesota. And this takes us through the end of December for this outlook. And wildland fire potential, we're looking at some of those driest areas, especially in northern Minnesota, in Montana, and Wyoming and Colorado, having above normal wildland fire potential. But we also need to consider that during harvest time, especially if we are having a dry and warm fall, machinery related fires are always possible, and something that ag producers really need to be aware of, and cleaning out their equipment and just watching for those, because they can happen at any time. With that being said, some summary information. Late summer moisture is helping in some areas. We've had some severe weather that's impacted crop, property, and wildlife issues in many areas of the region. Crops are progressing on schedule to ahead of schedule through much of the region, with good grain dry down anticipating to continue. Warmer than normal conditions should dominate the region through the rest of the year into early winter. The precipitation signal is showing better chances of above normal precipitation over the eastern portions of the region. Fall soil moisture recharge will be very important to drought prospects as we go into winter, with a high likelihood of drought developing in the central and southern plains, and drought really sticking around in some of those areas going into the 2022 growing season, where we don't see any type of recharge or improvement this fall. Again, a lot of information that's being shared through many. These slides will be available, so all these links will be available to you at that time. And again, a lot of people coming together to help put this webinar series on. A special thanks to Doug and Dennis for their help in guiding me through the process again. And at that point in time, we can have some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Let's go through the questions. One thing I'm going to do very quickly is, I think, show an image, because we had a question about this as well. And this may not be the easiest thing to describe, but there was a question about 1936, because those of us who are that old, that's not true actually, but a lot of us in the climate business sort of refer back to past years a lot, so we know how hot or cold this is this year. So one of the things that people were one of the things that came out of the summer was that it rivaled 1936, and it's rivaling 1936 across the U.S., but mostly beating the records in that dark purple color. Overall, for the lower 48, and you may have seen a publication about this that came out a week or two ago. Overall, it's probably going to be at least equal to, if not the record in terms of heat for the lower 48. Now, that said, some of the areas, especially where we are focusing, you can see 1934 and 1936 were still hotter. Most of those records, and I think I'm right here, most of those records are because of high maximum temperatures, which you would expect in the summer. This summer, and that's definitely the case in the West, this summer in our neck of the woods, and we didn't show it, and on retrospect, we probably could have, but minimum temperatures were extremely high this year. So when you average the high, the daily high and the daily low, you get an average temperature. That's why our temperatures may not have seemed like we were hitting 100 every day. In some places, it was definitely over 100 multiple times. But generally speaking, across our area, we didn't hit a lot of those extremely high numbers, but we did hit extremely high minimums. So a lot of minimum records were set. Minimum, we call them minimum high temperatures, however you want to call that. Anyway, back to you, Brian, because I'm sure there's a map people might want to refer to here. So make sure your map's up, your presentation's up, if you want. Getting to the questions or comments. Yeah, so that was one of the questions. Comments was 1936. Hopefully that other map put some perspective on it. And we'll go down the list here. Just a comment, possible that the northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin dryness will be enough to shave harvest yields from USDA projecting. Dennis, do you want to say something about that real quick? I know you responded.
Yeah, there's some problems there, but the worst in that area was actually non-agricultural issues that Trent Ford from Illinois had been mentioning more in urban areas. So there's been a little bit of loss of yield there, but it seems like that location, along with many other locations, seems to be having similar things that considering how bad the conditions were, yields are not that bad. And I think a lot of that has to do with us planting into very dry soils and developing good root systems early in the season.
And then there was a comment made, thank you, Virgil, about early maturing crops does often come at a cost, being lighter kernels, thus fewer pounds or bushels of corn to sell. And oh yeah, so a couple questions about smoke and or ash from the western states. I don't know if there's any ash issues. I haven't heard of any ash per se. There may be some, but I'm not aware of them in terms of streams and getting a lot of ash in them, but also from an agricultural point of view. Dennis, do you want to talk about it from an agricultural point of view, because you had a good comment in there?
Yeah, we've been talking about this several times this summer. The good climatological answer we have is it depends. There are issues both ways. That the smoke does reduce incoming solar radiation, and it can have some effect on yield. But there's been some recent research that indicates that the smoke makes the incoming solar radiation more diffuse and gets deeper in the canopy, so the crop is able to actually use it better. And the smoke also reducing incoming solar radiation could take a few degrees off the high temperatures on a day. And when we were seeing stress on crops because of some extreme high temperatures, there may have actually been some benefit. So the answer is we're not exactly sure how much impact that really had, positive or negative.
Okay, let me go back up here again. Yeah, any comment on the synoptic features that brought the moisture into Iowa and southern Minnesota, eastern South Dakota over the last 30 days? I would say it was whatever it was that fed that pattern. It was, as you said, a synoptic, which means short-term issue, which enough moisture got up there and a cold front was draped over the area. And we probably had some reoccurring in training, if I remember correctly. Training being storms moving over the same area for a while, as opposed to just one thunderstorm and it's gone. So anything else you want to add to that, Dennis? Or Brian, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, I'm punting on this one. I'd have to look at it.
Yeah, I don't think we did an analysis of that, but I would say it was a typical summer event, and yeah, I'll just leave it at that. In October, will anybody be able to discuss impacts of the fire smoke on climate and crops? Yeah, I'll say maybe, because we're going to have Brad on here. He may have some further information, and maybe by then Dennis will have heard a few other things too. Right, Dennis? Is that right?
We'll do some more looking. We'll do some more looking.
Yeah. Brian, could you elaborate a little bit more on comparisons and differences between, this summer in 1936, anything you want or know that you'd like to point out?
Well, I think you kind of summarized it. Yeah, you summarized it okay already. I can't really add much onto what you said, other than where we were seeing the heat and dryness in 36 compared to where we were seeing it this year. Mary Knapp in Kansas shared some information yesterday that in July of 1936, the average temperature for Kansas was over 100 degrees for the entire month. Well, we definitely did not see that in Kansas this year. So for any of these analog years, we look at some of the highlights, but realistically, a lot of them are displaced from from one year to the other. The example I'll give is the 2012 drought compared to the 1988 drought. Many people were talking about them in the same context, but 88 was more eastern, 2012 was more western in the Corn Belt. And so, you know, we do talk about these similarities, but when you dig down to each of these analog type of years, they can be very different because of where the center of these events were taking place compared to what we are currently seeing. That's probably the only other thing I'd add.
And we have, with the warming of the atmosphere, generally speaking, we have seen the likelihood of super dry in terms of dry air become less likely to happen. The reason I say that is because really dry air, with let's say low dew points, low humidities, however you want to look at that, is a lot easier to heat up over 100 than very moist air. Okay. Yeah. And anything, Dennis, you want to say on that line?
Just to riff on that, maybe one more thing. That's one thing we saw this summer. Early in the summer, there were very dry conditions, particularly north, dry air conditions in early June, where we had some very warm temperatures. For much of the rest of the summer, even when we had limited precipitation, we had some relatively high dew points. So we were still getting dew and moisture accumulating on plants. So it may seem odd, but you know, while we had dry conditions in places, we did have enough moisture on plants to cause some disease issues. So it's a really odd contrast, but it is happening somewhat.
Here's a kind of a comment. Heard a fair number of farmers cutting corn for silage while it still had value, who would normally grow it to maturity for grain markets. How do you split the savings? What you can harvest, what value is left from planted, from the intent to harvest for grain. I think that was a comment from Dwayne. And then how low are the yields? Okay, so good question. How low are the yields that we know of so far from Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and for corn and soybeans relative to previous years? Do we have any feel for that yet, Dennis?
I don't know, Brian, do you remember off the top of your head the whole corn belt for corn and soy were very close to trend line yields, but that is because better conditions in the eastern corn belt is going to be above, and that's going to balance out the poor up in the northwest. I'd have to look here real quickly to see if I could come up with what projections are up in that area.
Yeah, there were comments from state climatologists in both Minnesota and South Dakota in terms of last month's heavier rains last 30 days heavier rains helping a little bit in terms of bringing those yields up, especially in soybeans.
Yeah, Dennis, like you, I didn't look at the specific states overly well, but the national trend line was about where it should be. I do know that some, like you said, some states are going to be above while others are below, but it's going to balance out. Some of those states mentioned, I'd have to dig into and look at myself because I don't know the numbers offhand.
Adnan brings up a really good point about this year. Really early, March and April experienced their worst drought record, being the driest on based on the 6-month SPI since 1930. Sorry. So it was very dry this spring, especially in North Dakota and I think Montana for that matter. Did the southwest monsoon help late summer rain? I'll simply say, Bryce, it did not really get over the Rockies. So yeah, it helped in western Colorado quite a bit, not northwestern Colorado, but sort of south of there. They're still it's still bad up in northwest Colorado. Oh, a request for the slides. Yeah, so all the slides get put. Brian, can you show the links to where people can get the slides, if you will? And we'll just leave it on that page for a minute. The slides and the recording of all this jabbering that I'm doing will be, and Brian will be are on, let's see, presentation archive at the very top. We need to change that Illinois one to the Purdue one, actually. So try to maybe go up to the very top. Go to your very second. Yeah, that's a better place. Yep. And so they are available. And if you can't find them, you can always write to one of us and we'll get them to you in a PDF form. Oh, here we go. Brad Rippey's on. Minnesota corn yield, 174 bushels per acre, down from 192 last year. I think that's the expectation. And USDA calling for 176. This is from Bryce. 176 bushel per acre corn yield this year per the September NASS report. North Dakota is way down, of course. And then Brad is saying North Dakota corn projected at 108 bushels per acre, down from 139. South Dakota corn yield, thank you, Brad, 133 bushel per acre, down from 162 last year. Remember, and this is one of these big points we always like to make near the end. We've been talking drought, and implications for next year. Well, this is Brian showed. Don't change it to this, Brian. But Brian showed a couple maps of last year compared to this year when it came to vegetation. It was better last year, believe it or not, than it is now going into fall, winter. Okay, and last year was pretty dry. So nonetheless, we had retained moisture from the last 2 years in 18 and 19, which were phenomenally wet across most of the area. We had a little bit of a banking of soil moisture that we could tap into. Thus, last year, and Dennis, if I'm wrong about any of this stuff, just speak up. Last year we had better. That's one reason we had better yields last year, even though it was pretty darn dry. So I guess the potential for we're having another La Nina year doesn't mean it's going to turn out the same. And it doesn't mean it's going to turn out like the predictions are either. We hope so. We hope it gets a little wetter to the north and maybe even a little cooler than normal. Might be helpful. But there's no guarantee of that. So I hate to say sound the alarm, but we certainly emphasize the fact that we're dry now. We don't want to be dry now. We want to get wet, because soils will freeze up later and sort of prohibit some of the moisture from getting down into the soil column later in the year. So anyway, Dennis, anything you want to say, or Brian, along those lines of, we're going to update all this stuff in October. Thank God Brad's on here. He can hear all these things. I'll give him his responsibilities for in terms of the ag side. National corn yield projection as of September 1st is 176.3, which actually would be up from last year's final 172. So record yields projected for Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. So that tells you something right there. The Midwest will save us again. Dennis?
How do I follow that? I mean, okay, from a drought recovery standpoint, we're dealing with dry soils and climatology. That area of the northern plains that is still quite dry, the time is becoming shorter for them to be able to refill that soil moisture profile. In addition to that, the other problem we're dealing with is a lot of surface water. We need a lot of surface water up there to bring stream flows back and for runoff into ponds and dugouts, which a lot of livestock use. It's going to be very difficult to get much runoff because of the very dry soils. So we actually could use rainfalls in the fall, plus to get some big snowfall events after the soils are frozen, because then that could lead to runoff, which will run off into streams and run off into these dugouts. So we actually need both of those to really help improve the situation.
And major snow, at least average, if not above normal snows in Montana, Wyoming, and all those other places that feed a lot of water concerns downstream. So and that certainly we're sitting at a deficit, so runoff is going to be less than normal, even if we have normal, let's say, precipitation across the north. So the soils are so exceedingly dry. Let's see. Is there any other comments here? I might have missed a few in there. I hope not. Yeah, Bryce made the comment about the Iowa derecho itself knocked the yields down about 5 bushel per acre last year for the nation. That would be amazing. And then, how low are Red River Basin levels? Good question. Adnan, I don't know if you want to talk about that. I know you were on. Let's see. I've lost. I don't know. I didn't hear. We did ask the River Forecast Center for comments on that. I didn't hear anything too exceptional. Yeah, Adnan's not. I don't see Adnan on anymore. Anyway, we didn't hear anything exceptional about that, other than I'm sure they're going through some drought issues. But anybody else? Oh, there's Adnan. Okay. Huh. F. That's why I'm missing you. Here we go. Adnan, you get to talk. Maybe. Oh, you have to unmute if you want to. If you want to comment.
Okay. Yeah, I am. You can hear me. Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
During the past 30 days, we started having very helpful rainfall that actually brought the Red River levels above the median. We are normal. The Red River is flowing better in the south as you go to the north because of that limited precipitation in the northeastern portion of the state. Red River is still running just a little lower in that area, but not much.
Thank you, Adnan. And Adnan is the state climatologist in North Dakota, in case you wondered. So he does know. Thanks, Adnan.
You're welcome.
Okay. Yep, I think that's it. I appreciate everybody being on, especially Brian for giving the presentation, and Dennis for the backup, and backup especially on agricultural questions. So thank you, everybody. We will see you hopefully in a month or so. And as we said earlier, Brad Rippey, who's on, and Laura Edwards, the South Dakota state climatologist, will be giving the presentations. And I think that's it. So have a great day. Bye-bye.